There's lots of tools that we can use to compromise passwords. We can use applications like John the Ripper, and in many operating systems, passwords are stored as a hash and they use salting to make them difficult to crack, even if we're using a rainbow table. So instead of trying to guess a password, what we could do with a tool like CHNTPW, which we'll demonstrate in this nugget, we could actually use that tool to change the password on a system. And then once we reset the password, we can log in as the user account with no password required. Let's begin. So here are the 3 steps regarding this attack. First of all, we need physical access to a victim's computer. And in our lab environment, we've got, let's pick on this guy right here, our Windows 10 machine. Currently, we have username Bob. And currently, Bob has a password for his system, and it's nugget!23 with a capital N at the beginning. So with physical access, the second thing that would need to be in place is this Windows 10 computer. We need to allow booting from a removable device, such as a thumb drive or a CD-ROM. And what the attacker is going to do is going to bring in a bootable CD and boot up to it, and then run this utility, the CHNTPW, and it's just the letters. It's change NT password. And it's been around a while. Not only does it do NT, it does Windows 7 and Windows 8 and Windows 10. And then having booted to that CD and using this utility, he's going to modify the SAM user account information. And he can do things like resetting the password so there is no password. And then the attacker would remove that CD or that bootable media, boot the Windows 10 computer to Windows, and now there's no password for the account. And so he can log in, and now he's got full access as that user. And that would be the local user on this Windows 10 computer. So let's do this thing. We're sitting here at the machine running VMware Workstation, and let's open up a browser. And in the browser, let's do a search for CHNTPW and press enter. And that leads us to several links, and let's go ahead and select that. This is going to take us to the download section. And then from here, we can download a CD bootable image, which is really small, about 18 megabytes. And there's also the files for USB. And also, a lot of Linux distributions, including Kali Linux, already have this utility as part of that distribution. So if we have a bootable disk for Kali Linux, we could also boot to that CD and then run the tool off there. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this to download that to my host machine where I'm running VMware Workstation. So still here on this VMware Workstation computer, I've extracted the CD140201.iso, and I've placed it on my Y drive in a CHV9 folder. So all we need to do on our Windows 10 machine is tell that virtual machine that it's got this ISO image as a logical CD-ROM, and we'll allow that workstation to boot from that CD-ROM. So let's go back to VMware Workstation, and let's take a look at the properties of this virtual machine. We'll right-click on it, go to Settings for the Windows 10 machine, and we'll select the CD-ROM drive. And what I did was I browsed to that Y drive, to the CHV9 folder, and told this virtual machine inside of VMware Workstation that this ISO is sitting in its CD-ROM drive, in its logical CD-ROM drive. I also selected Connect at Power On, so when it powers up, it'll be there. So with that in place, I'll click on OK. And one last thing that we need to make sure is in place on this virtual machine, this Windows 10 machine, is that it's willing to boot to a CD-ROM drive, and check that first before booting off of its normal hard drive. So to do that, we're going to go into the BIOS of this virtual machine. If this was a physical computer, we'd use whatever the keystroke is to go into BIOS, the basic input-output system for the computer and firmware, to specify the boot order. And since this is virtualized, it's really easy to go there. We can right-click here on this virtual machine and then hover down over Power. And then on Power, if we go down to the very bottom here, we have Power On to Firmware. Effectively, it's going to boot to the BIOS setup. So we'll select Power On to Firmware. And there's the BIOS settings. So I'll click here, and then I'll use the right arrow key to go over to boot. And then I'll use the down arrow to select CD-ROM drive, and then I'm going to use the plus key to go ahead and move that to the top of the list. And that way, if this is saved, this computer will look for a bootable ISO first in the CD-ROM drive, and if it's present, it'll boot off that. And good news for us is we've got a bootable CD-ROM that we just associated with this virtual machine. So I'm going to press F10. It's asking us to save the configuration changes and exit. I'll press enter to accept the highlighted yes. And that causes the machine to boot, and this time we're booting to the CD-ROM. And so all I'm going to do is press enter. There's additional options as far as working and how to boot, but I'm going to press enter to accept the default. It's going to scan the file system, take a look at what partitions are out there, how they're formatted. It's going to make a recommendation regarding the partition that it thinks the Windows operating system is running on. And that is right here, possible Windows installation found. And here in brackets, it has a 1 already. So if I simply press enter, it'll actually use the value in brackets, which means we want to work with that partition. So continuing on, I'll press enter to continue. Here in this step, it's asking us to select registry files that we want to work with. And what we're after is SAM, the Security Accounts Manager. And that's the gold mine that we're after for user account management. So we have options of 1, 2, or 3, or quit, Q for quit. And by default, it's saying go ahead and do 1, which is password reset. So we'll press enter to select option 1. And we have a registry editor. We can list groups. We can edit user and data passwords. That's what we want to do right now. So we're going to choose option 1, which is suggested for us here. So we'll simply press enter to select option 1 again. Here it's listing the usernames. We have administrator, Bob, default account, and guest. And all but one of them are currently disabled or locked. And the administrator account and Bob both have admin privileges on the system. So now it's asking us to input the user number for the user we want to edit. And it's recommending 3E8. And that's a good choice because Bob, the user, is currently an active account. It's not locked or disabled, and he has admin rights. That'd be a good one to get. So because 3E8 with the leading 0 not shown here is already selected, let's go ahead and press enter. And then we'll choose option 1 to clear or blank the user password. So I'll type in 1, press enter. And then we'll accept the Q to quit. And we'll do Q one more time to quit. And then we'll put in Y to confirm that we want to write those changes to the disk and press enter. And it says if something went wrong, you can run it again. I'm going to go ahead and say enter for accepting no. And then going back to VMware Workstation, we'll right click on that virtual machine, go to settings, and we'll go ahead and select that drive and say, you know what, go ahead and let's not connect it, power up, and click on OK. And then we'll right click on that machine and simply go to power and select restart. So we'll reboot it and we'll confirm the restart. So now it's going to reboot, and because it does not have the CD there, it's going to boot to the hard drive. And currently, Bob is set to auto log on, and let's go ahead and just confirm that the changes we made actually worked. So using the VMware tools here at the top, I'm going to right click on the Windows 10 machine and specify that I want to send a Control-Alt-Delete to this virtual machine. And then we'll go ahead and let's sign out. And then to log in, check this out. It just says sign in. It's not even asking for a password because there isn't one. And I just realized something is that it would have been really awesome if we could verify that it was requiring a login before we did the hack. So let's do this. We know we can log in now by just clicking on sign in. There's no login required. What I'm going to do through the magic of VMware Workstation is I am going to roll this machine back to a snapshot before we made the change. So to do that, with this Windows 10 machine selected, I'm going to click on this icon right here to revert to the previous snapshot. I'll say yes, and then what we'll do is we'll just boot it. And this is in the state it was before we just used the CHNTPW tool. So we'll start it, and this way you and I can both verify that yes, it did require a password, and there was a password previous to you and I using the CHNTPW command. So this is in its previous state. So I'll right click on the Windows 10 tab here and send a Control-Alt-Delete. We'll go ahead and sign out. And there we have it. So to log in as Bob, I now need to use Nugget !23 and press enter. Yeah, and so there was a password before we used CHNTPW, and then after there was no password required. And that's how simple it could be for an attacker who gets physical access to a computer that's not secured to go ahead and own the system. And as an ethical reminder, we would never want to use this tool or any of the attack tools in an unethical or unauthorized way. So I'm glad you joined me for this nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.